Gigantamax Gengar has started appearing around the world, and in this video I'm going to be going over how to beat it, or if you should just skip it. Last weekend we had the debut of Gigantamax Pokemon in Pokemon Go with the release of the Kanto starters. These max battles were incredibly difficult to beat, requiring anywhere from 30 to 40 trainers on average. The catch rate was also really low, which meant that even after all that work, some trainers were still unable to catch their Pokemon. Thankfully, Niantic did actually make some adjustments for Gigantamax Gengar specifically, stating that these max battles will actually be easier with an increased catch rate, and they're also going to award 25,000 Stardust and 25,000 experience upon completion. You can also double these rewards with 200 Pokecoins, and for some players this will easily be worth it, guys. Like, we're talking 50,000 Stardust, 75,000 Stardust with the start piece active. And that's just from one single raid. Even if you decide not to upgrade these, the rewards actually feel worthy in relation to the difficulty level. Overall, in my opinion, these were amazing changes that I think most Pokemon players are pretty happy to see. Now with that being said, Gigantamax Gengar is still going to be challenging, so you're going to have to coordinate well between other players in your local areas. I would strongly encourage all of you to check out Campfire, Discord, and even Facebook for any local meetups that might be happening during this rotation. Now before we actually dive into the details and how you actually want to beat Gigantamax Gengar with the best strategies, we first need to go over how many players do you actually need to take this raid boss down. So in theory, this seems possible with around 8 players with maxed out Pokemon and level 3 max moves, also going up against the best possible moveset, which I'm pretty sure is going to be Psychic plus Sludge Bomb. Also, you want to have combined healer, tank, and attacker roles mapped out properly. Now for the average player, aiming for this exact scenario is hopelessly optimistic, so my recommendation is actually going to be about 15 to 20 trainers at minimum. This accounts for some players with proper counters and others that may not have all of the optimal stuff. Once again, Gigantamax Gengar is going to be easier than the Gigantamax starters from this past weekend, so I wouldn't really use that as a reference point. If you at least see 20 trainers in, do not back out of the raid, and if you actually faint out, make sure that you're clicking on the chair button, because this actually helps charge the Dynamax meter faster for the players who are still in the fight. If you actually back out, you're pretty much just shooting yourself in the foot and your teammates. Now keeping all that in mind, if you can't actually get a group together of at least this size, I would not waste your time with this. And I know that may sound kind of discouraging, but I just want to provide some realistic expectations here. This requires a lot of communication and coordination. These are not easy fights. I mean, like, as this past weekend has pretty much demonstrated, these are really difficult to get done. But thankfully, Gigantamax Gengar is going to be a little bit easier. I mean, in terms of how much easier, we'll have to wait and see. Now, there is actually one technique I want you guys to consider when you're actually going against these raid bosses, and that's going to be to restart the raid until you get a desirable moveset. So basically, Gigantamax Pokemon use 2 charge moves, and depending on which ones you actually get, you will either have an easier or more difficult time going up against the raid boss. In the case of Gigantamax Gengar, the best possible moveset is going to be Psychic plus Sludge Bomb, and the worst possible moveset is probably going to be Focus Blast plus Shadow Ball. This is mainly dependent on the counters that we're going to be bringing in, and because we only have so many Dynamax Pokemon available right now in Pokemon Go, the counters are pretty limited. So basically, for those of you guys out there in smaller groups, this strategy could literally make the difference in you guys successfully beating the raid boss or not. So seriously, make sure to keep this in mind and let your local players know about this. And once again, just to clarify, if you don't get the right moveset right away, just restart the raid and it's going to give you a different moveset every single time. Which also means if you fail with a good moveset, you're going to get a different moveset after that as well. So it may take some trial and error, but these things do not disappear like after 45 minutes, they're pretty much there for the entirety of the day. The next thing I want to go over is, should you evolve your Pokemon? And the answer to that is yes. This is arguably one of the most important things you guys have to do. Do not go in with your base stage attackers like Bulbasaur, Ghastly, don't do that, it's just terrible. This is going to be a team effort and you cannot be carried through these max battles. I understand that these are going to be difficult to get done, but you need to at least put in some effort on your side if you actually want your team to be successful. Now with that being said, let's take a look at the best attackers you want to use against Gigantamax Gengar. The first Pokemon, and arguably the most important, is going to be Greedent, which is actually really accessible. This only requires 50 candy to evolve from Skwovet, and for the ideal moveset you want to go with either Mud Shot or Bite plus Crunch. Greedent is going to be a normal type Pokemon which actually resists ghost type moves. It also has access to a double dark type moveset like I just mentioned to do super effective damage against Gengar, while also resisting most of its movesets except for Focus Blast. But once again, if you actually just restart the raid to reroll the moveset to not have Focus Blast, this will actually be huge for a lot of you guys. The next Pokemon is going to be Metagross with Zen Headbutt plus Psychic. Now Metagross is actually one of the best tank options for the Gigantamax starters, and you may or may not want to use this Pokemon depending on which moveset Gengar has. Once again, if it has Psychic and Sludge Bomb, this will be fine, but if it has Shadow Ball and Focus Blast, this is going to do super effective damage against Metagross. So yeah, probably not going to want to run that. So with that being said, Metagross honestly isn't the best counter to use against Gigantamax Gengar, but again, it's not the worst counter either. Following that, we have Gengar with Shadow Claw plus Shadow Ball. This should be mainly used as your Dynamax Pokemon during that phase, so basically in your third slot. You want to switch over to Gengar every single time your Pokemon Dynamaxes. Otherwise, it's going to take super effective damage and go down really quickly for most of those movesets. Gengar is going to be a glass cannon, but it's also the easiest Pokemon to build and evolve for these raid battles because you can actually mirror trade them with somebody else for the discounted trade evolution. Basically, instead of 125 candy to evolve it from Ghastly all the way up into Gengar, it's only going to cost you 25 candy, which is honestly a huge advantage, especially for some players locally that don't have good counters. This is honestly going to be a major strat for some players, especially if locals don't actually have good counters. You can just trade them your extra Dynamax Ghastly and then have them evolve them all the way up, and now you're actually going to have some players who have decent counters to use against Gigantamax Gengar. If you actually consider the alternative of them using Wooloo instead, having them at least use Gengar is significantly better, even if they actually faint out. Once you guys have actually acquired Gigantamax Gengar, you should start bringing this Pokemon into battle as well, as it's actually going to be one of the best Pokemon to use during the Dynamax phase for increased damage. Following that, let's talk about Blastoise with Bite plus Hydro Pump. So if you're actually going to be using a regular Blastoise, if you have Bite as a fast move, this is going to turn into Max Darkness during the Dynamax phase, but if you actually have Gigantamax Blastoise, it's automatically going to use the Water-type Gigantamax move regardless of the fast move that you actually use. It's just a built-in feature for these types of Pokemon, which again is why I recommend using Gigantamax Gengar, because that's going to be using a Ghost-type Gigantamax move. I also want to mention, don't really worry about giving this Pokemon Hydro Cannon since that will require an Elite TM. It's really not necessary here. Now finally, our last Pokemon is going to be Charizard with Fire Spin plus Overheat. Fire-type moves actually deal neutral damage against Gengar, so when in doubt, burning these Pokemon if you don't have anything else. This is especially true if you actually had Gigantamax Charizard, and basically same thing as Blastoise. Do not worry about actually having the exclusive Comday moveset Blast Burn on it, since that will require an Elite TM, and it's really not going to do that much more damage. So keeping all that in mind, those are going to be the Pokemon that you should use in battle. But what are the Pokemon that you shouldn't use in battle? So I do not recommend using Grass-type Pokemon like Venusaur and Rillaboom, because Gengar double resists them. The same can be said for Phalanx and Double as well. I do understand that some players might think that Double is going to be a good Pokemon to use because of its normal typing, but it has no super effective moves to use against Gengar, unlike Greedent, which is why you don't want to use it. The next question is going to be, do you need to actually power up your Pokemon? So while it is recommended, I really wouldn't go past level 30. Most of the damage increase actually comes from upgrading your max moves rather than the level of your Pokemon. So if you do have the extra MP, it should be going there instead. I feel like this is actually really important to note because a lot of players have actually been maxing out their Pokemon for these raid bosses, and honestly, you don't need to do that. Like, yes, it is going to be important, but level 30 should honestly be the cap. The rest of it should just be going into upgrading your max moves. That's it. If you level 50 your Pokemon, it's not going to be doing nearly as much damage as opposed to those max moves. Taking a look at our next segment though, should you upgrade your max moves? Obviously the answer here is going to be yes, if you can afford to do so. The max limit of max particles per day is going to be 800, but in the future, I do think it's important to understand the strategy here, so that's why I'm going to go over this right now. To be fair though, this mainly just limits free-to-play players, but not so much pay-to-play players. So if you have like extra resources you just want to drop on this stuff, you can totally do that. You're going to have to buy more max particle packs, but honestly, it's totally up to you at the end of the day. Anyways, you're going to have 3 different classes of Pokemon: attackers, tanks, and healers. Let's first go over max attackers. So when it comes down to regular Dynamax Pokemon, each time you upgrade your max move, your attack power is going to be increased by 50. So at the base stage of level 1, you're going to have 250 damage. At level 2, it's going to be 300, and at level 3, it's going to be 350. Now for Gigantamax attackers, they actually have a higher base attack. So for level 1, it's actually going to be 350, and then for level 2, it's going to be 400, and then level 3 is going to be 450. I do understand that some players probably don't want to invest into max moves or even, powering up these Pokemon if they don't have good IVs, but honestly guys, IVs make very little difference, so I wouldn't worry about them that much. So in my opinion, I think the best strategy would be once you get your first Gigantamax Gengar, lucky trade that with somebody else if you do have a lucky trade set up. That is going to be a special trade, by the way, and then from there you can just power it up to level 30, it's going to cost half the Stardust, so it's really going to cost you nothing. Upgrade the max moves all the way, and then you should be good to go. And if you actually caught the Gigantamax starters this past weekend, you can pretty much follow the same strategy. That's probably what I'm going to do. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about Max Guard. So basically the way that this works is that once you actually unlock Max Guard at level 1, you're going to be able to block 20 HP. At level 2, it's going to be 40 HP. And then finally at level 3, it's going to be 60 HP. So like I mentioned earlier, this is essentially going to be a tank role. Now after you actually use this, the boss is also going to strictly target your Pokemon and ignore the others for a certain duration. This is a really effective strategy to stay in battle even longer. You're going to have shields appear next to the HP of your Pokemon, which indicates that you actually used Max Guard. These will not show up on your teammates' Pokemon though, only yours. Now when it comes down to Max Heal, I couldn't actually find the exact calculations for this, but I do believe it's going to be percentage based per max level. So if anyone actually knows the exact info for this, I would love to hear it in the comment section down below, as it's going to be really helpful for future videos. Anyways though, the upside to Max Heal versus Max Guard is that it actually heals all the Pokemon in your battle team of 4, not just your own Pokemon. You can see how much HP your teammates have at the top of the screen. so you're going to have to decide if it's actually worth using max heal, max guard, or even max attack. If most of your teammates already have a bunch of HP, use max guard once and then max attack twice. Now ideally for most team builds, regardless if you're going to be the attacker, the healer, or the tank, you want to ideally have 2 tanky Pokemon plus 1 attacker for the Dynamax phase. This could look something like Greedent plus Blastoise and Gengar. When the Dynamax meter fills up, you want to switch into Gengar to launch Max Phantasm, and then once you go back to the normal phase, you want to switch back to one of your tanks like Greedent or Blastoise to build up energy again. Now I do also want to go over, since some players probably don't know this, if you see that max bubble pop up on screen, you actually have to swipe right or left into it to get the additional energy. To be fair, Niantic never really told us how this works, so I feel like for most of you guys out there, you do get a pass. But if you're Mystic 7 and you've actually been doing this for numerous videos, despite your comment section telling you that's actually how it works, that's a different story. No hate to Mystic 7, I do love his content, but that was a bit frustrating to watch for a long time. Now finally, one of the most important things I want to go over is going to be to communicate with your local players, guys, and know your role. The first thing you guys are going to do when you enter the max battle is that you're going to be paired up in groups of 4 based on who joins first. So the best way to actually get into the right teams will be to join in sections of 4, and then repeat that until everybody else is joined. Ideally per team of 4, you want to have at least 1 to 2 tanks / healers along with 2 attackers. Based on effective research so far, this is going to give you the most balanced team. Now for most casual players out there, they're probably not going to have the resources invested into these Pokemon, so if you are a more seasoned player, I would consider taking on the tank / healer role in order to actually help out your team a little bit more. I do want to remind you guys, once you actually faint out, do not leave the max battle. Make sure to cheer for your teammates by tapping the button constantly, as this will actually fill up the Dynamax meter even quicker. This could honestly make the difference in actually beating the raid boss, and for some of you guys out there, this could be your first Gigantamax Pokemon. And once you actually get your first one, the future raid bosses or future max battles are going to be a lot easier. Now on the off chance that everyone's Pokemon does faint out though, the battle is going to end, but you will actually get your MP back, which is pretty nice. But with that being said, that pretty much covers everything I wanted to go over in this video. Hopefully some of you guys are going to be able to get this Pokemon during this weekend. I wish you all the best. And if you actually are able to get this done, let me know in the comment section down below how many players it took you and what strategies you guys actually use. Otherwise, if you want to know what's upcoming for the month of November in Pokemon Go, then check out this video next.